Cal, we often talk about verisimilitude when it comes to mini painting, but when it comes to lore and storytelling, I don't think in 40k there has ever been a story that reflects the feeling of reality more than the Badab War.
I think I'd have to agree with you. I think the reason for that is because Badab has this feeling of history. So when we take a look at how the Badab War started, you could say, well, did it start with the fall of Signax? Or was it the death of Rovik Blake? Or was it the removal of the Charnel Guard?
Cal, I think if we're being honest, we all know what the true answer is.
Okay.
It's the Firehawks. It's always been the Firehawks.
Alright, yeah, no.
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that helps towards a more deep investigation. I think that the Badab War helps us realize how history is condensed.
It's like the condensation of key moments in a war, not the whole thing.
Well, when you take a look at how people examine Badab, they don't actually examine all of these key events that led up to the Badab War. They just focus on the Badab War itself and they're like, oh yeah, I like this cool moment or that. But when you look at it that way, it doesn't have the richness that this... Yeah.
Because the Badab War itself was about 16 years worth of that war time, but it was centuries in the making.
Yes, it was. It was centuries in the making, and anybody with eyes could see that it was going to happen. It's like, what is the cause of World War II? And the obvious answer to that is World War I.
Yes, but what started World War I?
And some people will snap their fingers and say, hey, obviously, it was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
But why was he assassinated? What led to the acts of these people to go that far?
And I think this is the issue. People take a look at this and they go, oh, okay, obviously there's been a fire here, so the lighter is the issue. And it's like, no, that is not how fire investigators look at things, right? Yes, the lighter started the fire, but it is not the cause of it.
If someone gathered tinder and poured petroleum all over it in a room, are we really going to blame the spark that set off the fire?
Yeah, it's almost as if that's how people treat it.
The lessons are never in the act itself, but how it started.
Yeah, it's always like that with crime scene investigations. It's never the final act. It's how did we get to this moment?
Exactly. How is it that Rovik Blake was driven to desperation, and immediately after that his successor, Luft Huron, driven to barbarism?
And I think this is an important point about the Space Marines. The Space Marines aren't transhuman, but rather hyperhuman. Given all of the human elements removed from their carnal desires. Luft Huron was the best of us. He wanted everything to be great for Badab, but almost immediately, instead of being loved, he needed to be feared. The world he was charged with protecting turns against him. Is this where that seed of hate started? Is this where the war truly began? I don't think so. So what did make his heart grow black and turn him to Huron Blackheart? Was it him fighting uphill against insane imperial doctrines? One of the biggest lessons of the Badab War is that mixed Imperial Guard forces could be almost as effective as a Space Marine chapter when it comes to fighting the enemies of the Imperium.
Humanity has to face tremendous threats like the Orcs, Drukhari, and the Tyranids, and it doesn't have time to watch for betrayal. And if everyone did as Huron did and unite their forces, there would be a definite hope of victory.
Huron exposes all of the weaknesses of the Imperium, from the micro to the macro, such as the idea of keeping your units in check through strategic weakness. What madness! Not only in doctrine but also in practice, the way that he repeatedly appeals to the High Lords of Terror, and it falls on deaf ears.
From the logical to the emotional, you can see exactly how this man is slowly torn apart. He is not a man of callous indifference. He is not Stebo Lazaric. You can almost feel every ounce of hope he gets with every small victory and the devastation he feels after the Charnel Guard leaves.
But does a war start on a single man's hopes and dreams, or a single man's twist from love to hate? I don't think so. The reason why I don't think that a single man is the determinant factor in a war is because of Rovik Blake. The factors that led to Rovik Blake's death was always going to cause problems for whomever was in charge.
The threat surrounding this sector is always going to be a problem for whoever was in charge. Like with the pirates, if they're just left alone, they will cause civil strife like they did on Signax. But the forces required to face this threat will bring the eye of the Imperium, because they won't provide you any resource to fight this threat off, because it's an autonomous zone.
Or simply because of the lack of care of the Imperium.
And it truly was that.
With this, we see 3 of the factors that are starting to build the pressure that will cause an inevitable war. Single man's ambitions, hopes, dreams, and fears.
The enemies that Badab faces, both internal and external.
And the crushing bureaucracy of the Imperium itself.
But there are 2 more factors that caused this war.
The first is the Malstrom itself, which seems to have a perverse sense of humor. When we last talked about the Badab War, the Malstrom we described as being similar to that of germs.
People forget how much of an impact germs have on world history. The Black Death alone has made more of an impact than any one person.
The flaring of the Malstrom after the intervention of the Black Templar. This is one of the major factors which caused the problems for the Astral Claws.
The unhallowed heart spat out by the Maelstrom caused so much issue that people could point at that event alone and say this is what caused the war.
And our final factor is the Space Marines themselves.
And it's because they are hyperhuman, not because they are inhuman.
It could be blamed on a single individual, such as the prideful Steebor Lazarick.
Ugh, Steebor Lazarick.
But honestly, that could just as much be blamed on the chapters themselves.
From the Loyalist side, we see them being removed one after the other because of their fidelity to their brothers.
The human desire not to cause harm to your fellow man because you see how they are fighting, how they are doing their job.
Luft Huron and the Maelstrom Warders were a respected group. People felt that he was doing a fantastic job. They didn't want to fight him, they just wanted him to comply.
A swift and brutal compliance operation may have been much better than the start to this war. But finally we have to go to something that people don't truly examine, which is this the fault of the warders themselves? And I'm not speaking of the Astral Claws and how they hid the Tiger Claws and how they went beyond the Sacred Thousand. I'm speaking of the Mantis Warriors and the Lamenters.
I don't think we can blame them for any of it.
No, the thing is that people look at their actions, but they don't look at who they are. The Lamenters had such heart, such passion, and such loyalty for Luft Huron because they had finally found an ally, somebody who they could trust in. That human element is what led them astray. If this was the Charnel Guard, would we truly have the Badab War as it happened? Instead of the Lamenters, you would have the Bringer of Sorrow,
who also happened to have strong ties with the Inquisition. But it's not the tactical aspect that could have changed things, it's the human one. They're described as zombie-like, and are these the people that are going to come to the aid of the Astral Claws if they asked for it? Especially during the acts leading up to the Badab War, like the attack on the Carthagins.
Or what about the Mantis Warriors, so filled with pride for their home sector, feeling every single stab of betrayal that Luft Huron did in the same ways that he did. They so easily went along with his plans, not due to his tactical acumen, but due to that feeling of betrayal, that feeling of being left alone.
There are many chapters out there who would not have followed Luft Huron just because of their temperament alone. It's not just one reason that causes the Badab War, but all of these reasons. In fact, what the Badab War shows us is the uniquely human aspects of the Space Marines.
It is the fact that you can point to so many instances, so many factors that could be the cause of the Badab War, is what makes it still interesting to this day. You could point to Tor Aart and his utter idiocy and say, this is the cause of the Badab War. But the hurled insults and barbs of an idiot pale in comparison to a feeling of betrayal, that sting that runs deep. Did the war for Badab truly start not out of an act of spite, but an act of kindness, where the Black Templar aided the Malstrom warders in finally quelling the Malstrom zone, only to be left alone as they struggled to breathe and recover from that same war? Perhaps the barb that stung the most, perhaps the barb that kept Luft Huron in the Palace of Thorns for so long, is the fact that the Black Templar were recalled, and they left. They left him, not for a petty reason. They left because the survival of the Imperium was at stake, or so it seemed. Nothing hurts more than cognitive dissonance. Perhaps Huron paced those halls thinking, am I in the right? Am I actually helping? Or perhaps have I done as much damage to the Imperium as these monsters? The other half of him ripping and tearing at himself as he thought, no, I am the one who has saved this zone. Is this the moment that started the Badab War? I don't think so. I think it was all of this.
For humanity's greatest desire is to lead and to lead well, and that is exactly what Luft Huron sought out to do, and to be loved. And if one cannot be loved, then he must be feared. And if he can't be feared, then he will cause terror. And if respect cannot be earned through fear or love, then he will make you see through terror.
A man is only as great as how the people view him.